Hello, and welcome to my home. You're my first visitors since I just moved into my new place after 2 years of everyone will listen to me stories about supply chain drama. Anyway, I'm grateful to have a home, and I'm glad to join you guys today at the Upstream 2022 event. Today I'm going to talk about caring for contributors, and I'm going to start by framing this a bit in terms of the industry today. There are many open source strategies, and many companies are formalizing their strategies. They're creating open source offices and programs. They're hiring rare skilled contributors right and left, but fewer companies have actually integrated contributors and community work into their legacy operations, and we'll talk about that a bit. I think there may be a need to change the way that contributors are viewed internally by their own company, and also to change a system of rewards that may be a legacy system that doesn't necessarily acknowledge people that are working in a community. And we'll talk about what I mean by contributors in a minute. I also want to point out that I'm going to be talking quite a bit about large companies, and I've worked with them for many years and encouraging them to participate in open source. So I'm not going to hash out why it's important to them today. But I do want to focus today on developers and contributors because they're experiencing burnout in a big way. Also, as the issues of supply chain security rise and there's increased pressure to help solve that problem, I think we're going to need more participation and better care of the communities that are going to help see that through. So I have just recently, as in a couple of weeks ago, wrapped up about 8 years at Red Hat. I led its open source program office, and I know that company contributions have always, of course, been huge at Red Hat because everything they do is in the upstream. So everything we do is based on open source and working with communities. But companies are an ever-increasing portion of today's modern open source software development. So I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to talk about that. I've been working with the open source community since 2005. I appreciate that at the time, developers were just trying to figure out how to make a living doing open source. That was the big question. What is the business model to be able to make a living off of open source because people are excited to do it? Well, today the problem has shifted a bit, and there's no shortage of jobs for people that have open source skills, but what we're finding, what I'm hearing from developers is that they're finding that they're picking up a job at a new company and they may be decently compensated, but they're also finding that their career seems to park right there and they don't advance much. As I was thinking about what I might talk about today, I ran across this thread. Now, I'm not here to take on the big Silicon Valley companies, so I'm not taking shots at Google or Meta. But we do know that in many companies, community contributors are being treated a bit differently. And then the folks are heads down and working on product engineering or pushing product out the door. So we want to talk about that a bit. Now, I'm going to define contributors. So I'm talking broadly, and the folks who I had the privilege of leading as the head of the open source program office for a number of years would remind me that you can't just talk about developers when you talk about community contributions. There are myriad contributions that come from different talent sources and skills and interests that make up an open source project. So code adoption, yes. Writing code, yes. But you also have a whole cast of characters that help support a successful project. And a lot of people have started in open source as non-technical contributors, and those contributions are incredibly valuable. So I'm going to walk through a couple of principles. My first principle I'm going to espouse is professionalism. In other words, treating our contributors as the tech professionals they are and not as cultural hobbyists. Now, this is 2022. People aren't just doing open source for a hobby anymore. And if a professional is working for you, they should be treated as one. There is a bit of a legacy, especially for managers that have been around for a while, that may have been involved in years gone by where they viewed contributors and developers to be on the fringe or not be serious developers. They may not really appreciate the rare skills. And so putting yourself in check, encouraging others to put their bias in check is always a challenge. Just be aware and keep working through it by showing up as a professional. There are some unhelpful terms that sometimes get assigned or are responses to funding, supporting, focusing on open source projects within company environments. Non-revenue generating is a sword and shield. Non-mission critical is sort of a blow-off. And nice to have is just not even nice to say. When you hear people use these expressions, you should see them as an opportunity to have a meaningful conversation, to inquire, to gain insight into why they may be thinking or not seeing the connection, but most importantly, also to really ferret out an understanding and educate as to why the work that's being done and how it's connected to the company's business. Because if you're working inside of a large company, the decision to commit and invest resources in open source was done for a purpose, and sometimes you just have to remind people of that because it feels like a bank shot or it's an arm's length away. So if you hear these expressions, just use it as an opportunity to have a conversation. And remember that real professionals will get the job done, and having people come in and pinch hit can sometimes not work out the way you'd hoped. Okay, so here's my second principle. It's around reputation. My advice to companies is to treat contributors as if your company's reputation in the open source ecosystem depended on it. Because, well, it does. A reputation and the ability to influence a project really relies on the contributors and the staff involved in the project. It doesn't, although you can at times buy a seat on a governing board, that's not the same influence as showing up and doing the work, and the work is really critical. So you want to show your contributors the respect they have and they've earned in their community, and acknowledge that is something that's earned through working together, from doing projects together. The second, a couple of practices I want to mention related to reputation, of course, the first is to acknowledge and respect that, understand that is, and then help support them so they can continue to earn that reputation and have an opportunity to work with others, especially for up-and-coming developers. Make sure they have an opportunity to speak at events. Sometimes, and a couple of years ago, I always said make sure you have a travel budget. It's a bit of a hybrid now. But make sure that your community contributors have access to be able to participate in public events, to be able to demonstrate their projects, and to have access to people that can give them advice that have done that before. At Red Hat, we had a team. Many people on our team would review abstracts or do coaching on talks for folks that were new at it. One of the other practices that Red Hat has always had is which leaves an individual contributor's reputation intact and associated with their own identity, was to not require that a Red Hat employee change their email address when they started contributing on GitHub. That was very different a decade ago. Most companies didn't have that policy. Red Hat was running that policy because we appreciated the fact that a person had an earned reputation in a community and trust, and they had their own brand or their own identity. It was important. Now, I talked to Stephen O'Grady at Red Monk a few weeks ago, and he told me that's actually more of a trend today, that most companies are gravitating towards that policy. So if your company's not already there, think about being there. All right, principle number 3, professional development. This is where the sleeves up, heavy lifting work comes. And especially in today's world where we're seeing a lot of people burned out and feeling unsupported or overwhelmed. I know I'm generalizing, but we know that's true generally. People are exhausted. Pandemics made it hard, working in an isolated way, even for those of us that have been working remotely for years. Just not to see each other from time to time has been really hard. And so the response really needs to be to double down on everything we can do to help support people. And that means support them in their own career goals, understanding what that person wants. But for the open source contributors, sometimes it takes a little bit of effort. My comment for engineering is that any kind of a career path should be the same as, say, a company has both proprietary product and open source projects they work on. The promotion path and the rewards have to be the same. They can't be treated as a different class of citizens. And then you should also have an explicit career path for non-code contributors to make sure that they have a ladder as well. And I'll talk about some of the things we did at Red Hat. A couple of practices. So, and again, drawing some examples from Red Hat. Engineers who advance in their career ladder are actually measured in part by contributions to community. They have that explicitly in a matrix that says, I can do these 5 things, I've done these 5 things, and one of those things is always community. It's very important. It's something companies can consider that want to elevate and focus on the value of community contributions. For non-code contributors, this can be really helpful to actually create an explicit path. And I'll talk about my experience at Red Hat a bit. When I first joined Red Hat, someone on the team approached me and said, we don't know what our career path is, because for folks that are supporting community architects, and others, their contribution is not code. So they can't really be measured in the same career path as an engineer, even though many of them are deeply technical. They can't say I contribute to this particular project, because that's not their role. That's not what we're asking them to do. So we spent some time actually creating an explicit career path for our community architects, is what we refer to it. It was formerly community managers. And that career path includes, or was modeled after, the engineering matrix. So there's similar things, but it's more tailored specifically to community work. Then we created a peer review panel, and for very senior promotions, we have a senior review panel, folks that worked on peer with me, so senior directors and vice presidents, many in engineering, some in marketing and other areas of the company that have an appreciation of community work. And so it's incredibly valuable. The person gets exposure where they may not be seen before that by others. Their work gets elevated and celebrated and validated. And so we found it to be a great way to encourage our non-coding contributors to give them something to look forward to. And we did that in collaboration with what we call our people team, HR. And look at that, the cuckoo clock is going off. I picked that up when I went to an event in Italy, an open source event, so it brings back fond memories. At any rate, this is really valuable for the folks on our team that are non-code contributors, and you might consider doing something this yourself. There's different ways of approaching it, but that's one way we did. All right, well, those are some of my thoughts. I will tell you, I wanted to talk a little bit about quality. I don't know if you've ever read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which is where we did the play on words from. But the author talked quite a bit about quality in his book. He ruminated on it. He wanted to define it. He wondered about people who cared about it and what it meant that they cared, along with a lot of other questions he asked. But quality, for me, the whole discussion really is about the pursuit of quality. If your company wants quality contributions, if they want a quality program, if they want quality relationships in the open source ecosystem so they can go about their business in the way they're hoping to, then they need to focus on delivering a quality experience to their open source contributors. Say thank you, show gratitude. Hallway hockey is nice, but equitable compensation and career advancement is more better. At any rate, those are my thoughts. I really appreciate your time today, and I'm going to close now and wait to see if you might have some questions. Thanks a lot.